with froggy brain.
Well, I mean, as you know, I'm a sandwich kind of guy, but I've never had a tricky sandwich, Alex. What is a tricky sandwich?
It's what I do when you change my foggy brain into froggy brain.
Guys, we're live. We are now live on YouTube.
Okay, that's fine, Liz. We're talking about sandwiches. There are fewer things more important to Americans than sandwiches.
But we will get to things important to application developers, application development managers, CIOs, UX designers, and anyone.
I know, but this conversation is standing in the way of between me and my sandwich.
We got to get through it.
Let's get through it. Okay, Liz, you got to set it up. You got to tell everybody what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to say that this is DOOR3 TV, and I am Liz Flyntz, Director of UX and Design at DOOR3, and I'm here with Jonathan Blessing, CEO of DOOR3, and Alex Asianov, President and Principal Consultant at DOOR3. And we're here to talk about trends in UX design. I'm a little concerned about the term trends, but I think that these truly are trends in that they're styles that may or may not stick around. I guess if they stick around, then they become not trends anymore.
I think this document covers some important points of evolution in UX.
Yeah. And trends are a bit more stable than fads, and we're not calling it fads of UX design. So I think we're good.
What would be a fad in UX design? I don't know. Like, remember when there were those like blinky, like everybody had like little, I'm really dating my entree.
Blink tag?
Like when links would be blinking, or there'd be like a sort of like blinking border around elements on a screen. That was maybe bad.
Circa 2000, yeah.
Anyway, we've identified some trends, shall we say, in user interfaces. And this is kind of like more in the realm of applications and products, I would say. You see some of this on sites and marketing, but I would say that this is more like consumer facing product design is where you kind of see this stuff first. So we'll just talk about them. So the first one is neumorphism, which is a portmanteau of new and skeuomorphism. Basically, the idea is that these objects are sort of floating in a semi-realistic way on a field. And there's this kind of turn away, as Jonathan was saying, from things looking like they're derived from print design and looking more like they're derived from product design. So this kind of looks like it all could be like a handheld device, like it's all made out of a smooth piece of plastic. And what differentiates the different elements is just a little bit of shadow that makes it look.
I don't actually think of it as a continuum from one thing to another in terms of the evolution of this. I actually think of it as like a decoupling from. I'm old enough to remember and to have watched really UX evolve over the last 20, 30 years. And in the early days of software, we all tried to make software look like common objects. Right. I mean, I'm sure you guys, if you've ever used a Mac, you probably remember that Apple's kind of built-in notepad for OS X always used to look like a notepad. And it was kind of silly. But in a very real way, many of our ideas, the metaphors were all rooted in print and in common objects. And I think what we're seeing happen over the last, and this is accelerated, I think, considerably in the last decade, is a decoupling from the real world. And I think now we're starting to imagine in kind of a little bit more, just kind of in a pure way, what software should look like and how people should interact with it.
What do you mean?
For the first time.
like, how do you, when you say should?
Yeah, maybe not should isn't the, yeah, but maybe should is the right word. I think many of us growing up with software over the last 30 years, we've always seen it through, like, think of the desktop. Like this is a metaphor that still hits us over the head every time we turn on our computers, unless you're using a mobile phone, right? But if you're using a notebook computer or a workstation, you turn it on and you are immediately interacting through, like, with your software through the metaphor, this perspective of the desktop. And really only with the arrival of iOS, I mean, that's, I think, when it started to kind of really accelerate back in 2007 or so, 2008, many of us, like en masse, began working with software that had taken several large steps away from an interaction rooted in the desktop metaphor. Yeah, my thoughts.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's also that there's this, as products get more infused with connectivity, real world products, I think the connected products, the screen-based products, look more like objects.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think actually, so this, because we looked just, we had 5 minutes of prep time before we started doing this, recording this conversation. But of the things that I saw in this deck, this is the thing that strikes me as by far the most substantial.
The neumorphism.
Because yes, I'm not going to give credit to the word though, because it is a subtle, and I think really it's a big deal. It's a big deal that we're now making software. We're now comfortable, I think, making software without always falling back on metaphors derived from the real world. Like the language of software no longer, software, like think of kind of complex user interfaces that we build for our corporate clients. It's no longer the case that the software always has to look like the dashboard of a jumbo jet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I remember what software looked like in the late 90s and early aughts. If you were building, there was almost an expectation that enterprise software had to resemble the cockpit of a complicated commercial aircraft.
Yeah, there was the idea that the metaphor was a console, a complex console, and that could be sort of built out to increasing levels of complexity.
And you needed about the same training as an airline pilot to use it.
Okay, shall we, what's next? What's after neumorphism?
Ooh, I wonder.
Oh, we're going to talk a little bit about.
Oh, pros and cons. Looks trendy, looks friendly.
So there is an issue where this there's some concerns about accessibility. I think that if you build this right, it can still be accessible in terms of, as accessible as anything else in terms of a screen reader. It can be kind of hard to differentiate the button states. If you look at today, week, and month, it is kind of hard to see which one is turned on.
I think this is an especially poor implementation. I think if you got, this is going to date me a little bit. Do you remember the Windows Metro interface that debuted with the Windows mobile phone?
Yeah.
It was a huge break from, it was a much more substantial break from the desktop metaphor than iOS. And it had a high contrast mode, which really addressed this specific problem.
Yes, you don't want to be differentiating subtle shadows. I've also seen this poorly done where somebody didn't take their art class, that they're like shadow and light fall art class, and shadows are kind of pointing in different directions as though the light source is coming from different directions, which can make this screen even more confusing if there's like multiple different shadow falls. But this one seems to, at least there's like one sun in this world.
Yeah. Next.
Illustration and abstract texture. This is so hot right now. This is something, this and like 70s curvy kind of bottom heavy fonts is the hotness, as I think the kids maybe still say.
Yeah, I have a consultation with a tattoo artist later this afternoon because I want to be a little bit more textured myself.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you want like a hand-drawn illustration with like some ink splatter and maybe
dimples.
70s font. Yeah, as you can see, there's some like ink splatter, some faux ink splatter happening on the left-hand side in that illustration. You see this a lot. This is pretty recent that I've started seeing this crop up everywhere. Like previously, the really cool thing were these pretty clean, broad field illustrations where there were a lot of different elements that were sort of interacting with each other. Think of the Casper mattress illustrations that were all over the subway a while ago. Those were really cool. But now the thing seems to be this, this like as though it was drawn with ink, although obviously it was not.
So I would categorize this though as more of an aesthetic development or an aesthetic trend.
Yes, certainly. And it doesn't really have much to do with how the interface functions or even really how it feels. It's really very much about the look. But, you know, you see it a lot. And so I think it's something for people to consider. It does give a feel that's like a little bit more warm and friendly. Yeah,
I wonder if this is a general trend toward warm and friendly. I remember encountering an app called Headspace, meditation app, about 4 years ago. And I was very surprised at how almost Dr. Seussian the illustrations were. They were actually, you know, very nice and warm colors. And like this, what you're showing here, Liz, is actually a bit more stylized. The ink splatter is a certain type of addition to give it a little grit and realism, I guess. But the trend toward friendliness, I'm wondering what we think about that, like on the UX side, because buttons are functional, that they can be clean.
Yeah. So this may be, there may be more to this than just aesthetics, because I'm remembering it was important, I think, say 10, 20 years ago, for software to appear serious. And now, I do see more warmth and playfulness in interfaces than ever before. I mean, I remember when Microsoft, I think it was with Microsoft Office 2000, they introduced those playful, what's it called, Clippy? Do you remember?
Yep. Oh, no, everyone. Clippy.
Yeah, I know, but it was very irritating. But it was daring in the sense that
software.
Yeah, no, it was very irritating, huge failure, easy to mock. But it was daring in the sense that until then, like all corporate software had it was, you know, all corporate software was always wearing kind of a tie. and this was kind of an attempt, I think, that maybe was running 20 years ahead of its time to be a little bit of to kind of inject a little bit of play and levity into the interface.
Yeah, Clippy was like, hey, it looks like you're writing a letter. You know, want help with that? And this is like, hey, it looks like you possibly have had all your passwords leaked in a massive data breach. Want help with that? It's like it's really nice about it. And I think something else we see here that we'll talk about a little bit more later is these colors are really soft and pastel-y, which was like not a thing that you saw even 5 years ago, I would say.
No, this is very Miami.
Totally. Miami, kind of early 90s. There's like a vibe.
Like you're heading to Miami Vice, so I just have to say it.
No, this is not Miami Vice. This is not Michael Mann. This is pastel Miami.
Next. Oh, we're talking about this.
Yeah, forget this. Let's just go on. We did our own pros and cons. We don't need someone else's pros and cons.
Yeah, look at that. We already talked about it. Softer, warmer colors.
Warmer colors.
Totally. So, I think there's positives and negatives to this too.
Can I point out the obvious?
Yeah.
20 years ago, do you remember what monitors look like?
Yeah.
Like you needed high contrast and boldness in order to kind of sit, in order to read the monitors.
Right. And I think that also, part of this is that these are consumer facing. So it's very much about, here you're trying to like lure someone into buying some plants. So, you want to convey a sort of like warmth and approachability that maybe if you're producing finance software is not exactly what you want. But I think this is certainly easier to look at than like that sort of mid-range gray with electric blue that is the colors of Microsoft.
That said, I do want to challenge what you just said a little bit, Liz, because the same sort of consumer to professional migration of style sensibility happened earlier in several generations, right? Where the most prominent of which was the move away from really busy dashboards that we talked about before to more like almost like iPad interfaces. And yes, they still contained the cool blues and all the hallmarks of corporatism in B2B applications or internal operational software. But there was a lot of talk that became a lot of spend and became a lot of software about the fact that corporate users from 9 to 5 are on their couch at home with their iPad the rest of the time, right? And so their expectations are set by the commercial B2C trends, right? In terms of the software, and it takes some time, right? And corporations are generally not the early adopters of consumer sentiment or consumer sensibility, but I think that something that focuses you away from harsh stuff and toward like a soft environment that within which you can actually get work done and where your eyes focus where they need to. There's nothing wrong with that as something that might make its way into corporate software as well.
Yeah. You see the skeuomorphism trend here too with the overlays and the little shadow and the rounded edges. This looks like layers of cards. Next.
Yeah, Alex, I mean, one of the things you're saying, I think this is part of I think the pandemic has really accelerated the blending of professional and personal spaces and with that aesthetics, right? I mean, here we all are, at least I'm in my home. I think you're in your home, Alex, or is that you're at least in our galaxy?
It's where I float most of the time. Yeah.
But I think in all seriousness, your point is rooted in a larger cultural trend.
Yeah. Yes, but going back to what you said about monitors, on a early 640 by 480 or even 1024 by 800 monitor, wasting the space, which is what rounded edges do, would be unthinkable, right? But this gives it breathing room for the human brain to have some way to focus, and now we can afford that space.
Yeah, I think
you couldn't have even seen that the subtle background color would not have even been obvious.
Right, and I think you still see that people are. It makes clients very nervous to waste space to this day, especially corporate clients. They're like, there's a lot of space between this header and the content. It's like, I think it's hard to make the case for that breathing room, but it's important that as designers we continue to do that, because it really does kind of make it a nicer space to be in. Like, you don't want to walk into a room where every corner is filled with overstuffed furniture.
Yeah, and this actually this goes back through literally thousands of years of evolution of physical architecture, because if you look at paintings of Greek town squares and things like that, there was space, like the scale difference between the human and the space that was around them between physical objects and buildings was enormous. And we've made more and more compromises as we got squeezed into, less and less space per human. And the computer is kind of a place where now with more technology and stuff like that, we can go back to what is actually more comfortable for humans, which is to actually have breathing room.
Totally.
I'll see you off planet, Alex.
Hey, that's why I'm up here. Lots of room between the stars. Next slide.
Next slide. Warmer colors look more friendly. I mean, yeah, sure. I kind of agree with that. It can be a little hard to differentiate. If you're red-green colorblind, you're not going to be able to see the difference between the sales and the profit. But ultimately, you can still read the labels, and so it still works. It's purely a decorative element at that point. Friendly copy. I know this is going to drive Jonathan crazy. Yeah, so this trend of micro copy, another term Jonathan doesn't like, being more.
I haven't said anything. How do you know that?
I can just tell.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of supposed to be more conversational and more directed at the user in a sort of a more, I don't know, friendly conversational way. It can be quite irritating to have an application making bad puns about beats at you, but maybe that's just me. Some people seem to really respond to this.
I like the illustration of the beat.
I like it too.
Yeah.
One of the things that you have to be a little cautious about, right, is not everyone, even in one country, let alone two English-speaking countries, right, speaks the same English, and the same things are not funny to everybody, and the same things don't come so finding the right level. To some degree, that's solved by figuring out who your intended audience is, right? If you can characterize it and it somehow fits into categories that also align with language and sensibility boundaries, then you're golden. Otherwise, you have to just negotiate that just a little bit carefully. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it requires thought. You can't just be like, hey, so my copywriter has this awesome sense of humor. Let's just have him or her put whatever they want on there. It doesn't work that way.
Totally.
No, and it's, I mean, yeah, this is also very fragile copy. So what kind of feels friendly today may not feel friendly in a year or two.
And it requires very careful updates.
Yeah, calibration. Yeah, this is a trend. I don't know how. Liz, you're in a better position to know if our clients are asking for friendly copy or friendlier, more personable copy in our interfaces.
I think there's places where it works, like, the let's go on the call to action button. That seems reasonable to me. That kind of indicates like it's clear what's happening there. There's a button, it has an arrow pointing to the right, which always indicates forward for English readers or anyone who reads left, right. And then, it kind of is clear what that's about. And it doesn't seem kind of like overly familiar, but the line about nice to see you hanging around again, that's a little too much for me. I'm not hanging around. I'm doing stuff. I'm here for a purpose.
Oh, really? You take that personally?
Yeah, I'm personally offended by that.
No, there's a kind of a little insult in there.
Yeah. I'm like, who the heck are you, Beat app?
All right. Friendly copy.
We're not that into it. It can be okay, but
and we just identified more cons than are on this slide anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. One of the important cons, of course, also is that you may decide to use some quote unquote friendly language that then is not using labeling best practices. And it's very important that labels maintain consistency across an application. And you can really reduce usability by doing things like switching out, especially key labels that are on, buttons that lead the user forward, et cetera.
Oh, here's a fantastic example of be careful with this. If I'm a lawyer, I'm offended by the distinction between human and legal. It's just, I believe that I have, the same number of chromosomes as the other humans.
Human.
Yeah.
Our lawyers are humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially our law firm clients. They're filled with humans.
Yes, very human-like.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do we got next? Ooh.
So glassmorphism is a lot like neumorphism, but it's another portmanteau of glass and skeuomorphism. So this uses a lot more transparency in addition to the shadows and the rounded edges. As you can see on the example with the withdrawal on the right, there's a sort of like as though there's frosted glass over another element.
So where I see this, so there's one way where you can look at this and say this is just an aesthetic trend, but where I see it as I think more substantive and less of a trend is in modals, right? Where I remember what modals would be like back in the day, where they would lock up the entire OS for an application, and now I'm seeing a lot more elegance in user interface design with the use of modals, thanks to transparencies, where they're localized in whatever the path the user's on for that application. So they're much more context sensitive. And I think I don't know that I'm going to say the word glassmorphism, but for sure, I think transparent. I mentioned it. I didn't use it, but I guess I said it. But yeah, I think there might be some meat on these bones. I don't think this is just an aesthetic trend.
I do also think that the slight translucency maintains some degree of continuity when you do have, if you use it in a modal or pseudomodal form, because it gives you just a tiny hint of like what you left behind, kind of in the screen behind that. There's just a tiny bit of information that's really conveyed through this, and it is there's a physicality to it, and I think that this is what both of these morphism things are. In some ways, they are an attempt to create a different physicality in this virtual space. I actually, you said earlier, Jonathan, that it's an attempt to get away from those physical analogs, and I agree that they get away from sort of this is a airliner control panel, but it is an attempt at a simulated physicality that feels like close enough that you can almost touch it.
Yeah, I mean, to expand on what I was saying, I think designers are more successfully converging on a new language or vocabulary for building virtual space that is less bound by our inhabited feelings of actual space.
Yep. Next slide.
Next. So this is a big thing with Apple's Big Sur, and Microsoft's using this now. We've all seen this with these like sort of smoked glass layers. It has the same problems as any of the other morphisms with contrast. And it can start to you can start to have a lot going on when you have a high resolution image in the background, like on the left there. And then you have these like frosted glass modules on top of it.
Is this the last in the deck?
One more slide.
We're going to talk about animation.
Okay, because I have a question.
Yeah. So we can look at some of these examples, but this is our last page. Can we look at example 1? If we click through, will it open?
Ooh.
Let's see. Oh yeah. Yeah, so what you see here is, a chart that lets the user move things around and animates live. But then there's also like set animations. And some of these are what we call micro animations. So instead of just dropping down, there's like a little animated part of the drop down. I think that's it for that one. We can go back to the, yeah.
Okay. Good. Any other examples?
Sure, what the heck? Let's look at two. Oh, this one's, yeah, this is a very simple example, but this is like a touch animation that you could have on a phone or a tablet.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
But that's
this
it.
is build. So animation, I think this is part of a larger development or evolution in UI design, like what we, I think one of the truly most profound things that's happened, which is not in this deck, strangely, is hand gesturing. Right? I mean, I can think of no greater change to user experience, user interface design than what hand gesturing has brought us. And some of these animations I feel, have really helped us better appreciate and interact with hand gesturing driven applications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, do we have time for a quick question? I want to ask you guys a quick question. I want,
Mhm.
where are we going, right? What do you think the next big trend or kind of line of evolution in user interface will be, without saying VR
I think
or
it's
AR?
honestly.
You think it's what?
I think it's voice, honestly. People
Voice?
love being able to do stuff without having to pick something up or touch the screen. It's still super clunky. Everyone's been saying it's the next big thing for the last 15 years. And I think that, all of these devices that people have in their homes that, listen to their every conversation and serve them up ads on all their devices are sort of like part of moving it forward. But especially after like watching people who have low vision or are blind use screen readers and then also use voice commands on their devices, I'm like, there has to be a better way to do this. We must be moving towards this being more seamlessly integrated for everybody. It's so useful when it works.
Voice. Okay. What's your vote, Alex? Do you have one?
I would say haptic interfaces, and eventually, not too far from now, but a lot closer than people think, is brain-machine interfaces. Non-invasive.
The haptic, yeah. Apple is so slowly integrating haptic into their computers and their notebook computers and their desktops. So it'll probably show up in their mobile phones soon too.
I also think, and this is going to be a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me for a second, right? AI, like Liz, you mentioned, people being able to do things without using their hands so much, right? Well, that's about intentionality. That's about machines executing our intent. Like if you really get down to it, kind of like our arms move when we intend to, not because we write a command, right? And so inference of intent, machine learning driven inference of intent from subtle cues is something that can drive computer behavior without us having to do, say, touch, or even necessarily overtly think anything, right? And it's like an extension of us, and I think that there's room in there for certain things that could be quite interesting.
Okay, I'm going to throw in my prediction. It's perhaps even less risky than your predictions. Biometrics generally. If you think about your iPhone, right, which you unlock with your face, right? That's amazing. And now virtually all the apps on my iPhone are able to participate in the facial recognition that's provided by the operating system, which is amazing. But I think we're going to see this spread more widely. And I'm sure you both, or maybe you didn't see this, but I think it was about a month ago, Microsoft announced that they're getting rid of passwords for all their consumer-facing software.
Wow. I didn't see that.
It's all going to be, it's all going to be either kind of out of band, additional factor authentication, or it's going to be biometrics. It's going to be kind of authentic. It's going to be a fusion of authentication tokens, none of which will involve shared secrets like passwords any longer.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Yeah, it's exciting times.
Yeah.
Thanks, Liz.
And another exciting episode contributing to the exciting times of Door3 TV. And thanks for joining us, whoever did join us. And yeah.
Oh, what a lovely
we are in a
background, Alex.
beautiful plaza.
Yeah, that's Venice, and I just wanted to bring that right back to how humans feel right about space. This was built when there were no constraints about having too many people in the city, right?
Water levels were lower too in Venice.
And water levels were lower, yes.
All right.